Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are digging into the core moral argument of the book Tending the Garden. It's a really deep look into right and wrong, and more importantly, where that feeling even comes from.
Okay, so let's just dive right in with the central puzzle the book puts forward. It points out this really weird contradiction in how we all live. See, even people who say that morality is just, a personal preference, they don't actually live that way. We all act like some things are genuinely, objectively wrong, not just a matter of taste.
And the book immediately draws this sharp line between a simple preference, like I don't like anchovies, and a real moral claim, that feeling that betraying a friend is just wrong. That points to what the book calls an objective ought. It's this binding sense of should that goes way beyond our personal feelings. So this leads us to our first big idea. What happens if we actually try to get rid of this binding sense of ought? What does a world look like when we just throw out the concept of should altogether?
Well, according to the book, the consequences are pretty catastrophic. Without a real should, all these things we totally take for granted just fall apart. Trust? It becomes impossible, because there's no real obligation behind a promise. Justice? It's just whatever the most powerful person says it is. Even our sense of purpose and freedom kind of evaporates, because without a should, there's no better to even aim for.
And here's the crucial point. This isn't just about ethics. The book's argument is that it's about whether reality itself even makes sense. You see, if we can't say that one thing is truly better than another, like, say, coherence is better than chaos, then our whole ability to reason just starts to crumble.
Okay, so if this ought thing is so important, where do we get it? I mean, can't we just find it inside ourselves or, build a reliable system from scratch? Well, the book argues that both of these very popular ideas are, frankly, doomed to fail. So let's take that first one, the internal approach. Why not just trust our gut? We all have that inner sense of right and wrong, right? That little voice inside?
The book's answer here is a really firm no. It argues our feelings aren't some pure guide to truth. They're formed. They get shaped by our family, our culture, our good and bad experiences, even our traumas. Your own inner compass might not feel broken from the inside, but that doesn't mean it's actually pointing true north.
All right, so if the internal compass is unreliable, what about building an external, human-made system? Well, the book says they all share this fatal flaw. They pretend to build morality from neutral facts, but they always have to secretly smuggle in values, like dignity or fairness, that they can't actually prove from their own starting point. It's a bit of a bait and switch. And this just brilliantly illustrates the whole argument. A real binding ought can't be created from inside a closed system of human thought. It has to come from the outside. It's something we have to receive, not something we can invent.
So this leads to what I think is the book's most interesting idea, the actual machinery of how we are all constantly being shaped. I mean, if our morality is formed and not just found, what does that process even look like?
Okay, check this out. The book gives us this really cool framework based on two key questions. First, how is the moral lesson delivered? Is it embedded inside something, like a story, or is it articulated directly, like a rule? And second, what's the scale? Is it just one single moment or action, an instance, or is it a repeatable structure or system? And what's so fascinating is how these two axes create this grid, right? It reveals these four fundamental ways we're formed. A story embeds meaning in a single moment. A game embeds a behavior into a whole system. Instruction articulates a specific task, and philosophy articulates an entire framework for how to think.
So the huge takeaway here is that the how is just as important as the what. A story about courage shapes you in a totally different way than a philosophical lecture about courage does. We are constantly being formed by all these modes all the time, whether we realize it or not.
So, now that we understand how we're being formed and sometimes misformed, the book starts this search for a moral source that can actually withstand pressure. What kind of truth doesn't just fall apart when things get hard?
So the book asks a really practical question. What kind of truth could actually work? What would it have to look like to not just be another broken compass or failed system? I mean, it can't just be a nice idea. It has to be solid enough to actually build a life on.
And so we get this three-part truth test. First, a real moral truth has to be universal. It has to apply to everyone. Second, it has to be independent. It's true whether you believe it or not. And third, and this is crucial, it has to be unbreakable.
Betrayal is still wrong, even if the person doing the betraying feels zero guilt. It still holds.
Now, a moral truth that can pass that test, well, the book argues that implies something more than just a random principle we discovered. You see, a pattern is something you observe, but a rule that binds you even when you reject it, that feels different. That suggests intention. It suggests authority. It stops being a suggestion and starts to feel a lot more like a command.
And this brings us to the final and definitely the most profound part of the whole argument. If moral truth functions like a command, well, then who is the commander? So after establishing that a true ought has to come from an authoritative will, the book makes its ultimate claim. The source of morality isn't a system, it isn't a philosophy, it's a person.
The argument is that only one figure in all of history, Jesus Christ, held all these impossible moral tensions in perfect, unbroken alignment. Think about it: justice and mercy, authority and servanthood, truth and grace. He didn't just teach what was good, he was the good, in perfect proportion.
And the book points right here to this moment where truth stops being a proposition and claims to be a person. He doesn't say, I'll show you the truth. He says, I am the truth. The lawgiver and the law become one and the same.
So in the end, the entire chain of reasoning in Tending the Garden resolves into this single cohesive answer. The argument is that the moral map that we all seem to be looking for isn't just a map, it actually has a face. And that leaves us with one final and pretty provocative thought to consider. If the ultimate source of right and wrong really is a person and not just a principle, then being a good person isn't about following rules. It's about a relationship. And according to this book, that changes everything.